Welcome to the ACT branch of the AIIA. My name is Heath McMichael and I'm branch president. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to elders past and present. And I also acknowledge members of the diplomatic corps who are here with us today as well. Thank you very much for coming. Now tonight, hot on the heels of our recent conversation with the ambassadors of Afghanistan and Bhutan, we continue our focus on small states. This time asking the question whether small states are revitalising the Commonwealth of Nations. We're delighted to co-host with the Royal Commonwealth Society ACT branch. Some of you may recall our highly successful collaboration with RCS last year, when we heard from the now outgoing Secretary-General of the Commonwealth, Baroness Scotland. And so welcome to all our RCS friends here tonight. Now we have an expert panel on hand to address the topic. We'll ask each panel member to speak for around 10 minutes, then open up to questions from participants in-house and from those folk online using the Q&A function with Zoom. And we aim to finish at 7 p.m. as per normal. Our first speaker is the High Commissioner of Samoa, Her Excellency Ms. Hinauri Patana. The High Commissioner is a career diplomat with 30 years experience in diplomacy and government, including development of Samoa's development strategy, fiscal and public sector reform. Outside government, she has been a consultant for AusAid, the ADB, UNDP and NZAid. She became Samoa's High Commissioner to Australia with accreditation to Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, Timor-Leste and Thailand in 2015. So let me hand over to the High Commissioner to begin. Thank you.
Well, may I start off by saying Tano Falava and to thank the organizers of tonight's get together for the opportunity to be a panel member. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to be talking on, but my good friend here, Professor Matthew Neilhouse said, you can talk about your experience as a small island nation and how you found CHOGM. And I think after the introduction by our moderator, Mr. McMichael, I would say that CHOGM gave meaning and defined in a way the voice for small island countries. It's very funny because I've been doing a lot of, as a public servant, I have traveled the world and participated in international and regional fora. And I've always found it very interesting that whenever island countries, whether it's the Caribbean, the Indian Ocean, or the Pacific come together, it's an affinity somehow. We always manage to draw to each other. And we start off not by talking issues, but basically just sharing on our countries, what size population, what's the economy like, and then we start talking about issues. If we're at ACP meetings in Brussels, that's the first, kind of approach. If we're at World Bank IMF meetings, the same thing, or Asian Development Bank. So there is something there in terms of whether it's the size of our island countries, the scale of problems and mutual, issues, challenges that we face. But over the years, I've found that this engagement, in fact, has intensified. And I think as issues crystallize more and more, and moving off from what could be handled nationally to now regional, international, because of, we are now at a stage, I think you could say, for us as islanders, our existence is at threat. It's been threatened. All of us are, and climate change is the primary focus priority for all of us. And CHOGM, for a time, even I used to go to CHOGM in those days. And I started questioning, is there relevance still for CHOGM? For the Commonwealth, not for the Commonwealth. And how would they apply in the context of small island states? And I think we can all say that, when you look at bureaucracies all across, whether it's the Commonwealth Secretariat, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, there will always be problems. But over time, I think from time to time, the Commonwealth Secretariat has corrected itself. And that's because of the voices of members of what constitutes CHOGM. And so when it fell on Samoa, our previous Prime Minister made a brave bid for us to host the CHOGM. I mean, 56 countries, the size of Samoa compared to, we were scrambling hotel rooms, transportation, the whole works. And thankfully, our constitution says we are founded on God. It's a matter of faith. And when it was actually, and I'll tell you why, because when it was finally released that we had been given the opportunity to host, I don't think any church, and if you go to Samoa, if you've been to Samoa, there are more churches sometimes than people. And you wonder how many constitute a congregation in Samoa. And sometimes the churches are sitting, it's almost like, yeah, here's the Catholic Church, there's the Methodist Church, then the next church along. But it does attest, and although it may sound humorous, it does attest to a deep faith in our country. And even I myself, I belong to a church here. So the minute we got the word that it was on, I told the church, I told the community, I said, start praying. So there were a lot of people fasting and praying. And in a way, when we look back at our experience, because even the Prime Minister was in our debriefing as ambassadors and high commissioners who had been recalled home, and some of our other senior officers, deputies, and first secretaries to help. The first thing she said was, the leaders and those who came would not stop asking, how did we do it? We had 4 major forums going. We had 37 side events. We had the first state visit of His Majesty, King Charles III and Queen Camilla, who were also attending the first, meeting as the head of the Commonwealth. We had 2 meetings, two days of meetings of the leaders. And then on top of that, the weather didn't hold up too good. And I can recall Saturday when the first diplomats were arriving, and the chairman of the entire committee, national committee that had been tasked with arranging for everything, said to us, I'd like you to come and sit in. And if you think that you have suggestions to improve things, it may be last minute, but it's actually essential that you hear and make a contribution. So everything was fine. Every subcommittee reported on what had been done, how ready they were, and and then it came to transport. And this lady who was in charge says, well, as people of faith, let me tell you, we asked for 300 cars, we only got 50%. And we all looked at each other and we thought, hell, we have presidents, the king himself. We had the king of Eswatini coming. We had the Sultan of Brunei put out the last minute, ministers, presidents, and we're going, what, 50%? And this is the chairman of the National Committee saying, well, don't worry, it'll work out. Next morning, there were 200 cars more than we needed. That's what we call divine intervention. But when you look back at, and we ourselves actually marvel at the efficiency in which things moved. And it was a lot of hard work. We had about 5,000 public servants, all redeployed and assigned to help. We had the whole private sector involved, and we had the whole country involved. And well before everything started, they were asked about their involvements. How about adopting a country? Well, they adopted a country. I think they started with Australia. When you get out of the airport, Australia being A, you saw Albanese's, photo right off when you turned to go into town. The flags of the countries were flying. But the humorous thing about this was just a few days before everything started, the Prime Minister decided to do one last check. And we found that there were flags flying of countries that were not the Commonwealth. So they had to pull down the flags. They had to convince the people, folks, they are not members of the Commonwealth. You can put them up when it's finished. There were also, and this is the thing about Samoa, as a small nation, we're very much into each other's business in the way, you work together, you think similarly in terms of how to achieve or how to get from point A to point B. So a lot of them spend their own money to purchase flags, to get paint, to paint they were painting all over the place the colors of the countries that they were representing. And for those who could not get flags, they actually Google got their kids working on, get the information, actually cut out the flags, sewed them themselves. And you look at them, you'd think they were bought at a store. They were actually made. The stones were painted, the colors, the bricks, you name it. Everything. As you went down to those villages that were assigned a country each, they had gone through the extent of making sure that the countries that they were assigned felt welcomed. The other interesting thing was that, there are two main islands. The bigger one, which is Upolu on the other, it's about an hour's ferry trip. It actually accommodated the spouse program. And I could not believe when we had the spouses come back and they said, we thought the meeting was in Hawaii. They had the same thing with flags, with, all these flags and everybody coming out to welcome them. So for Samoa, we represented not just Samoa itself, but we took pride in knowing that this was a Pacific affair. And we wanted to continue to do that because, as a region, we have Australia, New Zealand being the major partners of the Pacific family and every other member of Pacific. And so if you saw the opening number, we made sure we had all these cultural, representatives in that opening number because we wanted them to feel that it wasn't just Samoa hosting, it was the whole Pacific hosting. And I have to admit and to commend the Australian government and the New Zealand government who really rose to the occasion. They, gave so much of their time, not only the resourcing, and we also had for security because of so many, senior representatives of governments. We had a police force, not only comprising of Australia, New Zealand, Fiji, Tonga, Solomon Islands, but so the Pacific were represented in that respect. And so coming back in terms of the relevance of CHOGM for small island countries, and I think it's something that's it's not just for CHOGM. Most definitely, what we have found, regionalism is the answer for all of us in terms of the international, arena, because just one vote doesn't, nobody hears our voice, but collectively, and this is the reason why we rely very much on the Pacific Islands Forum, which is a leading regional institute that's, organization that Australia, New Zealand, and all of us participate in. And in a way, coming back to CHOGM, celebrating 75 years of this organization and seeing how over time there have been a lot of refinements to both policy, content, and application widely from region to region. I think we can safely say that it's a good beginning for the next round. And especially now as we're looking at geopolitical issues, I think it's an excellent way of reinforcing our voices, not only as the Commonwealth with common interests, and at the same time, make an impact as collectively as a body. So we picked, after much discussion with the Commonwealth Secretariat and of course, all other members, we looked at the issue of resilience going into the next, couple of years. How do we transform our societies to not only be more relevant, but also to be able to withstand the kind of challenges that we are seeing coming at us? And I think in that way, there were many issues identified, from climate change, certainly to engaging for us in the Pacific or Blue Pacific. Also looking at the voices of the youth, women, inclusivity, so that you don't leave anybody out of this. So it was a very intense 1 week of meetings, but it was actually for us a big gain for all who participated. And there was so much experiences and information, and the high level of exchanges. I think it's something that all of us took away from that. So if you were asking the question about the relevance, the value, and whether, for us, where do we go from here? I think we found our voice collectively as a region, not only as the Pacific region, but also as part of the Commonwealth and the bigger water. So I'll leave it at that and allow my other colleagues to, but I'd be happy to take on any questions there.
Thanks very much, High Commissioner, for that very colourful description of the meeting. So our next speaker is Kate Wallace, who is Assistant Secretary, Multilateral Strategy and Candidacy Branch at DFAT. And that branch is responsible for Australia's multilateral engagement in candidacies, UN reform, UN peace and security operations, and the Commonwealth of Nations. Big slate. And as Australia's Commonwealth senior official, Kate led the team at the Samoa CHOGM. And I can say that Kate also previously managed DFAT's relationship and investments with the World Health Organization and other key multilateral health organizations, including during the COVID-19 pandemic. But over to Kate for CHOGM.
Thank you, Heath, and thank you to the ACT chapters of the AAAI and the Commonwealth Society. It's great to be here, and thank you for all coming along this evening. Congratulations. What can I say? It's wonderful to join this panel with the High Commissioner and with Matthew. It is great to reflect and congratulate Samoa for the extraordinary meeting that you were able to take forward. I think that there are a lot of firsts to be celebrated. It's the first Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting that was held in a Pacific Island country. Despite it being the 75th anniversary, it was also Our Majesty the King's first Commonwealth meeting, first Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting hosted as sovereign. And it was my first meeting as a Commonwealth senior official. So I'm not sure, Heath, if that classifies me as an expert, but I will certainly give it a go. Look, being the second speaker, there are a number of things that I was going to reflect on, which are very consistent with what the High Commissioner has said. It was an extraordinary success by absolutely any measure. It never felt on the ground like there was even so much as really trouble getting around, which I think is quite an extraordinary feat. The way that I would describe it, as many of you would know, you come back from these meetings and the first thing that we do is put out a cable. And it was like, what should the title be? And for me, if I had to sum up Samoa's CHOGM, it would be Olympic. There was a very Olympic feel about the whole event. As the High Commissioner said, you hopped off the plane and you just saw these flags and this sense of celebration and this sense of pride and ownership from the Samoan people. And yes, Australia being the first in the alphabet, kind of after Antigua and Barbuda, but you know, the flags that were just lining the streets and the green and gold, it was just extraordinary. And I too was going to reflect on the opening ceremony. Yes, it was Samoa's CHOGM, but I really felt like it was part of the Pacific's CHOGM. There were literally tears in the eyes of people who were watching it. It was quite hard to get tickets for the opening ceremony, as you can imagine, with so many people on the ground. And so they were really sought after. And just hearing the choir and then seeing the dancers come in, and there really was, as the High Commissioner said, this beautiful coming together of Pacific cultures. So it was certainly led by Samoa, but there was, you know, Australian Indigenous dancers. Yes. There were Maori dancers, Tuvalu. It was just quite magnificent. And I would encourage you all to go on and look at it online, because it was really quite beautiful. Of course, what did this all deliver? And when you have such great logistics and such a great welcome, it actually brings together 56 nations to talk about policy issues that matter. And so there's about 3 things that I'd really like to focus on today. But when we reflect, the most important thing that I think it delivered was a very ambitious, Pacific-focused set of outcome documents. So, of course, there was first the adoption of the Apia Commonwealth Ocean Declaration. And it was a really tangible demonstration and focus on issues that matter to SIDS. We were very pleased that we were able to have some Commonwealth affirmation of the maintenance of maritime zones in the face of climate change related sea level rise. This represents a broader affirmation of PIF declarations and principles on maritime zones, and it's the first time that a leaders level document has reflected on issues that were, on these PIF declarations outside of a PIF meeting. So that is extraordinary. And I know that that took a lot of effort to get that over the line, and it was quite extraordinary. We also saw the leaders communique have very forward-leaning language on climate and oceans. And of course, many of you will have heard, it also flagged some future discussions on reparatory justice. We were also really pleased that it was a coming together of policing communities. That instead of having outsiders, it was different policing communities coming together to deliver a very Pacific-focused, compliance is the wrong word, but trying to make sure that security was there. It was there, but it was also distant. And I think that that was a really important balance that Samoa was able to strike. As the High Commissioner reflected, it also showcased leadership and resilience of small island developing states. This was one of the largest multilateral meetings that you can host. It's really complex, and there are many meetings side by side and side events, as you mentioned. So it was really important to us. One of Australia's biggest multilateral priorities is to try and elevate Pacific voices in multilateral forums. And one of the things that I like to reflect on when I think of the Commonwealth is Pacific countries represent 20% of the membership. That's a lot of voice around a table, and we really need to use it. And I think it's one of the values that we have with the Commonwealth. It really brings a resonance to our region and the issues that matter to us. And one of the things that I think that the Commonwealth does particularly well, I like to focus on the practical things that we do together. And for example, there are Commonwealth small states offices in both Geneva and New York. And that enables smaller states to be able to afford to be in these extraordinarily expensive cities and have a voice at those important forums. And one of the Prime Minister's announcements during CHOGM was that we would contribute an additional $7 million to support those over the coming 7 years. So it's upfront fees to enable them to expand, but also to have an ongoing presence in Geneva and New York. And of course, I think it will be important that the next CHOGM will be in Antigua and Barbuda. So I think it will be a really important carrying of the flame on small island developing state issues. Another area that we like to focus on very heavily is the strengthening of Commonwealth values. We really see that one of the strengths of the Commonwealth is in upholding Commonwealth values, including civil society engagement. And I know that Matthew will speak more about that shortly. But I think what stands the Commonwealth out and part of the democracy building efforts that we have is that we bring the voices of civil society together and we hear the recommendations of those civil society forums, and they are provided directly to our foreign ministers and to our leaders. And I think that that is a really unique feature of the Commonwealth that needs to be embraced, and we probably undersell it, but very, very important. Sorry, I'm going too much off script and forgot my glasses, so forgive me. We are also really wanting to look at how can we take the Commonwealth forward, and where are the areas that we see that the Commonwealth brings the biggest bang for its buck. We're all in an environment at the moment where we are competing for ODA. We have seen there are so many different things that countries are needing to provide ODA for. And so we don't want to see duplication. We don't want to see overlap. We want to see the Commonwealth work in those areas where it has the most to give. And they do things very, very well. As Matthew can attest, he is off on another plane on Friday. But election, peace building, good governance and human rights activities are really at the forefront of what we think that they do well, and they bring that civil society voice to those things. Of course, CHOGM also had the election of a new Secretary General. I think when we hear these things, we usually expect to hear a little bit of, I don't know, a few fireworks and a few rounds of voting, and as the Commonwealth senior official, I was sort of sitting in the wings, being ready for our Prime Minister in the event that he needed advice throughout the day. It was over before we knew it. So there was a lot of consensus behind the new Secretary General, and I think that that will be, that is wonderful to have such consensus. And of course, we are looking forward to working with Shirley Botchwey as the next incumbent Secretary General. I think she will commence on the 1st of April. And it's been over 2 decades since the role has been held by a representative from Africa. And it will be a really great opportunity to reflect on what the Commonwealth does well and where there's an opportunity for renewal in the future. And we're certainly looking forward to working with her and other member states on what an ambitious reform agenda can look like. Many will have seen in the leaders' statements, heads outlined an appetite for continued reform efforts. And really want to look at how we can focus in on those core activities. We want to ensure that we really build in deeply on areas such as election observations, peace building, supports for small island states, and climate finance. And similarly, we want to see a lot of transparency around transparency and targeting of the budget. And we also want to make sure that the Commonwealth is sustainable into the future. And of course, CHOGM is not the end. We now have got Samoa in as the Commonwealth Chair in office for the next 2 years. And we also have Tonga as the Chair of the Board of Governors. So it will be really good to be able to work with such Pacific leadership as we move forward. Look, Australia, of course, sees the Commonwealth as a really valuable organisation. We're very proud to be a member, and it was really great to have both our Prime Minister and our Foreign Minister there in attendance. And we are really looking forward to meaningful progress on development priorities and Commonwealth reform moving forward. And we also want to really see the strategic value of the Commonwealth come to the fore. It is 56 member states from a really diverse group of countries and cross-regional membership. And we're really wanting to continue to work to see the Commonwealth move forward in a successful way. Thank you.
Good. Thanks very much, Kate, for that comprehensive outlook. So now, finally, I'm pleased to call on my friend and former colleague, Matthew Newhouse, who is Honorary Professor in International Law at the ANU, where he's been since November 2022, after a distinguished career in DFAT. The non-RCS people, let me say a little bit more about Matthew. Having had head of mission appointments in the Netherlands, Zimbabwe and Nigeria, as well as a stint running Africa affairs in DFAT in 2015 to 2018. He's well remembered as Director of Political Affairs in the Commonwealth Secretariat in London from 2002 to 2008. And at the Samoa CHOGM, as Kate has mentioned, he represented civil society organisations. So please, Matthew.
Well, thank you very much, Heath, and my thanks to the other two speakers who have preceded me. Of course, for me, CHOGM was nothing new, although this was my first time as a civil society representative. My first CHOGM was back in Auckland in 1995, and I was later conference secretary to 3 CHOGMs in Abuja, Malta, and in Kampala. But can I also at this point acknowledge 2 other former colleagues who themselves have a substantial CHOGM background, and we were all together at the Australia Coolum 2002 CHOGM, which was delayed by 9/11. Hugh Craft, who was heading up the CHOGM task force at that time, having previously served in the Commonwealth Secretariat and had been conference secretary to several CHOGMs, and John Shepherd, who's also here with us and was the Commonwealth Conference Secretary at that particular CHOGM. So it's nice to be reunited today. I'm talking about the Samoa CHOGM, because I was heavily involved in the Perth CHOGM in 2011. It's not always been so positive a discussion about CHOGM. Back in 1987, way back in 1987, was when the Commonwealth was perhaps at the height of its influence. The Sydney Morning Herald derided it as a forum where countries which have no chance to stride the world stage and shape events can, quote, at least play at it. 4 decades on, in October 2024 in Samoa, CHOGM has proved its continuing relevance. With climate change, as we've heard, now the greatest existential challenge of our age, and small island states facing the very real threat of disappearing under the ravages of sea level rise and cyclone, it mattered that it was hosted by a small island developing state, and so well. CHOGM came through with a historic Oceans Declaration, which we've heard, and consensus language on climate change, signed up to by 56 nations from Australia through India to Zambia. And this has already played a role in the COP29 negotiations in Azerbaijan. The role of civil society has never been stronger. I have to say, I was there at the earlier days of these civil society forums when there was a lot of skepticism about their value. This time, the importance of the People's Forum, Youth Forum, Women's Forum, Business Forum, and a whole range of side events shows it has grown and become integral. It was to Samoa's credit that was determined to hold these forums, despite its limited accommodation resources, and have managed to do so. In fact, when I was consulted earlier on, I was a bit skeptical that it could actually be done and thought it might have to be a wider region, but Samoa was determined to do it and pulled it off. And never has the organization, exchanges, including with ministers, and outcomes been better from these forums. And I thought in particular, the way the forum drilled down beyond the theme into focusing on areas like climate justice, health justice, and freedom of expression was really helpful. It made the discussion so much more concrete. Civil society can also take credit for the adoption by heads of a key outcomes document, which hasn't been mentioned yet, the Commonwealth Principles on Freedom of Expression and the Role of the Media in Good Governance, drafted over the years by the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative, Commonwealth Journalists Association, the Commonwealth Lawyers Association, and others, which gives you a sense of the sort of civil society groups there. At a time when freedom of expression and media are under great threat, it demonstrated an important commitment to Commonwealth values, and it was quite shocking to hear about the numbers of deaths of journalists around the world in just the past year. This is serious stuff. Another key outcome was the agreed language on a process for reparative justice for historic evils and the impact of slavery. This will be a complex conversation to take forward in the next CHOGM in Antigua and Barbuda in 2026. But the fact that the British Prime Minister and other leaders were prepared to begin the conversation was an outstanding example of the Commonwealth spirit in action. And in this regard, I want to pay tribute to the head of the Commonwealth, King Charles III, in his first speech in this role at the opening ceremony. He set the mood perfectly with his comment that, quote, "None of us can change the past, but we can commit, and with all our hearts, to learning its lessons and to find creative ways to right inequalities that endure. A deeply conflicted world would do well to follow the Commonwealth example," and I need not go into some examples. The Samoan host, as has been said, did a remarkable job within their limited resources. In fact, I even got a car assigned to me at the very end. And a very beautiful car it was too. The program was well organized and the cultural events stunning. Prime Minister Fiame's leadership and engagement, from hosting civil society meetings, she turned up to so many of them, I know she has such energy, to chairing the leaders' retreat, was committed, warm, and masterful. The whole nation joined in the event, as been said, with villages adopting Commonwealth countries. The turnout at heads at around 20 might be seen as relatively low, but we need to be conscious that there was a competing BRICS meeting in Russia, which took away the leaders of South Africa, India, Nigeria, and Uganda, amongst others. But almost all member nations were represented at very senior ministerial level. I had the pleasure of talking to the Nigerian representative, very senior and serious minister, I think represent Nigeria well. And the smaller countries had the genuine opportunity, as we've heard, for their concerns to be heard, particularly in the Pacific. Australia and New Zealand strongly supported Samoa, as has been mentioned with the hosting, but did it in quite considerable resources and hundreds of people in the background. But also, as has been mentioned, with the commitment of their leaders. Australia won Commonwealth endorsement for hosting the COP in the Pacific in 2026, COP31. We hope that will help. I'm sure it will be a great help. And it deserved it. Of the old Commonwealth, only Canada, in political crisis at home, was missing, and that's a broader issue in the Commonwealth generally. One issue hasn't been mentioned by other speakers, but for those of us who have lived this for the last 20-odd years, one striking absence from the discussion and communique was Zimbabwe, which actually was a good thing. The release to the governments of the Commonwealth Observer Group report on the 2023 elections, which is now publicly released, by the way, I have an advanced copy, and I really commend it. But the release of that to governments just 2 weeks before CHOGM meant there was no time for consideration and substantive response, especially given continuing issues of concern. On the eve of CHOGM, even Zimbabwe seemed ambivalent, with negative noises from Harare. One still suspects there's still some time to run on this issue, but the Secretary General, Patricia Scotland, told me herself, and she had a very good final CHOGM, that she would like to have it sorted before she steps down. And there's now ongoing discussion around that with member governments. A capable new Secretary General and Ghana's Foreign Minister, Shirley Botchwey, was elected with broad support, as we've heard, on the first round. What I will commend Shirley Botchwey on doing was going out to CARICOM, to the Pacific Islands Forum. She's the only candidate to really get around and get support early on in that way. The next venue in Antigua and Barbuda has been locked in, as we've heard, and a substantive agenda is set out in the communique. It will now be important for Botchwey to put in place a reform process, as we've heard from Kate, and to secure the resources the Secretariat badly needs for its future. I also want to pay homage at this point, or acknowledge the role played by Anne Gallagher, the Australian, who has been Director General of the Commonwealth Foundation and so successfully pulled together civil society. We will miss Anne. She's met with this group here. She steps down later in 2025, but she has done a brilliant job with the Commonwealth Foundation. I think that has also helped strengthen civil society. And I was pleased to be at the exchange between foreign ministers and civil society at the end. It was somewhat impacted by the weather. We've heard about this, and actually was brought to a premature end with not only with the rain and the thunder, but when the electricity went off. Ronald, remember, he was there. But it was actually a very useful exchange. It could possibly improve, but it was historic in the way it happened. And in fact, one of the losing candidates, the Gambian foreign minister, was there with us and gave a very, when we heard he'd lost, gave a very eloquent speech about commitment to the Commonwealth. And I hope we see more of that, because it, as Kate has mentioned, this is so important for civil societies who sometimes find it hard to speak to their own governments back home, to have this opportunity and to be empowered by others working in the civil society space. Samoa's able hosting and sharing is likely to be replicated by Antigua and Barbuda, putting the Commonwealth's future now very much in the hands of small island developing states' leadership. With the support of the Commonwealth, they are able to perform a substantial role on the world stage, not just lay at it. This matters for all our futures. Congratulations, Samoa.
Thank you. Well, thanks to all our speakers. Now is the opportunity, on the basis of that rich discussion so far, for you to ask some questions. So what I'd like is for you to let us know who you are, speak up so we can hear you on the microphone. And so I open the floor to the folk in-house at this stage. Any questions? Yes, Rose. Judy, sorry.
I am Judy Schneider. I'm a member of AWIA. Questions for the Samoan Commission. And I understand that at CHOGM you all agreed to Pacific Coast hosting COP31 with Australia. And I was wondering whether, as part of those discussions, you talked a lot about what Pacific could get at COP31, just some preliminary thoughts.
Well, thank you very much. We're still in discussion mode. But suffice to say that all of the Pacific are running around, supporting Australia's bid to host COP31. At the same time, I think we see ourselves as possibly playing a role in this as well. And we have been given to understand that the Pacific nations will be very much involved in that respect. So it's work in progress. I guess that's a better way of putting it. So not being a scientific technical person, there's still a lot of information being generated, but we're also, I think, having to look at the alignments of not only policy contents, given the fact that every COP seems to continue to review progress since the Paris Accord was signed some years ago. And so there's so many stuff that each nation is actually tasked with looking at its own national policies, but also the developments. In the last COP that we just had recently, there are quite a lot of important outcomes that has to be discussed within the Pacific itself and Australia in terms of its leadership in the forthcoming COP that we hope Australia will host for the rest of the Pacific.
Other questions? Yes. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Michaela Wolf. I'm a student at the University of Canberra. My question is, how does the Commonwealth navigate this dual role that it has as a platform for advancing both these global South priorities such as climate justice, ecological justice, and reparations, at the same time relying on global North for its funding strategically? Doesn't it kind of perpetuate this neo-colonial dependency? And does it undermine at all this capacity to hold the numbers forward hold the members for accountable for democratic backsliding.
All right, well, with that's an open question to any of the panel members. Is anybody willing to start the ball rolling on that?
Sorry, it was quite a long question. Sorry,
So how does the Commonwealth balance this dual role it has? So obviously, like, these small states, they have their own agendas, not what they want. But at the same time, they do have this strategic reliance on big nations, other nations. How do they do that?
sorry, I would just say it's the multilateral system. The beauty of the multilateral system is where every country has a voice. And it really can help to articulate what are our shared responsibilities and what are our shared priorities. And so I feel that, whilst we might be a major funder, it is part of the conversation. It's part of setting priorities, and it's part of listening and making sure that we can continue to work towards stronger development outcomes across the Commonwealth.
If I can also add, over time, there's been a lot of focus on good governance and transparency and accountability for the use of these resources, which all of the partners, both receiving and those who are supporting. So it's a framework that's being very much now, I think, entrenched in terms of the involvement of major donors. And we accept it because we know at the end of the day, it's just as valuable to them as it is to us. We ourselves need to see working with them in terms of outcomes that we are hoping to achieve under the aegis of fund financing and all of that.
I'll make a couple of comments on this too, not least because there's a big discussion happening at the moment about engaging the global south. And in fact, I was asking DFAT to comment on this only last week with the relevant group. And I think the Commonwealth is a very good example of a country where developed countries and the global south meet and engage together around issues. And if I might just mention one experience I had when I was working with the Commonwealth Secretary. I went to Tanzania where there were quite some tensions between various political parties, specifically around Zanzibar, which is sort of incorporated into Tanzania but has a certain independence. I had the advantage of having grown up in Tanzania as a child and speaking Swahili and so forth and knowing it very well. And I had a chat with one of the senior officials and I said, it's really very intrusive what we're doing in this space of talking to various parties, opposing political parties and so forth. And we're coming from outside as the Commonwealth to do this. Why are you giving us this opportunity? He said, because we own you. And I thought that was a fantastic answer. Tanzania felt it owned the Commonwealth as much as Britain might, or Australia might, or Samoa might. And the very fact we now have these rotating chairs from whoever hosts the CHOGM also emphasizes that sort of political ownership by all its members.
Matthew, could I ask, just coming back to your comment earlier about the King Charles's comments and the sense of how the past needs to be addressed by way of work going into the future. And my question really is, to what degree is that sort of neo-colonial frame led in the saddlebags of the Commonwealth these days?
Neo-colonial men in the saddlebags. Interesting thought. Look, the Commonwealth has behind it the history of the British Empire. Have to acknowledge that. At the same time, it's that history that gives us a common language to talk to one another in English, gives us a lot of very similar values around legal values, educational values, and democracy values, development values, which are reflected in the Charter. And so it gives us a common language to talk about things in. And that became very evident, particularly in the discussion around reparative justice. Now, I wasn't in the room like Kate was, so you might like to ask her about that, but I think I was being reasonably well informed, and not just by the Australians, although one or two Australians were very helpful, about the way in which the discussion was developing, such that square brackets went around language, which was at first challenging. In fact, even I took a moment when I saw blackbirding was there. But as it turned out, it was something that leaders could all agree around. And I think what is important about, I used to say when I was working for the Commonwealth, I spent my whole time working on the messes left by the British Empire, trying to help sort those out with the countries involved. And I think that is actually, yes, there's lead because there's the past, but there's an approach which is working with countries to try and find their way through this history. I mean, there will be people, no doubt, in this audience from Fiji. That was a situation I worked on a lot. I could see Margaret over there for one, who has lived it. And that's a very classic example, and perhaps we're still working through that. But where the Commonwealth comes in and it supports, it's through a very homegrown approach now. It's not King Charles coming out to tell anyone what to do. Yes, he's playing a more political role than his mother might have. Yes, he's very committed and has always been. I worked with him when he was Prince of Wales on this, on environmental issues, but it's still done in a way that is respectful and understanding that we're in a very different environment now.
But it's interesting, there are also two members of the Commonwealth who didn't have any, ties to England. Yeah, Togo and one other. Yeah, so it's.
All right, Ernst.
And still have a member of the local branch. I'd like to hear a little bit more about the role and the influence of non-government organisations. Matthew has just indicated he wasn't in the room in one discussion. What role and influence did non-government organisations have, and what was the perception of the government representatives to non-government organisations? Were there several other than yours?
Well, I'll comment on that first, and I'm sure Kate will then pick this up. But as I mentioned, there was one declaration that came out on freedom of expression, which had been a work of non-government organisations that the leaders in due course accepted. It's taken time, and that itself illustrates the influence. What impressed me at this CHOGM in particular, and it was perhaps less in the forums, although that was good in the various forums, was this wide range of side events where ministers, government representatives were coming, some presenting, some listening to presentations from civil society, right at the beginning of the CHOGM, before the final meetings of foreign ministers and leaders happened. And that actually is a fairly new development. There was this sort of wrap up with the ministers. And what was interesting when we were discussing issues like climate justice, health justice, freedom of expression, there was a lot of congruity. I went into one, it was sort of hard to know which to choose. So I ended up going into one led by the Commonwealth Local Government Forum, which is not actually an NGO because it brings local government together, but works very closely with NGOs on sustainable cities, which is actually very relevant to a lot of the Commonwealth now. And it had come out of Rwanda, where it had been a big issue there. But it was just interesting to see the sort of dialogue happening there, the ideas being exchanged. So I think the influence is growing, it's becoming more positive. You sitting next to you might say to you, oh, in my day, we kept the civil society out of the door, it wasn't serious. And I know Hugh and I sometimes debate this issue. So it really changed, I think, positively. Others can comment. But Kate, how did you find it?
Look, I guess when I think about the value and the importance of the Commonwealth Charter is really what comes forward. It's what unites us and the overarching value. So, of course, the Commonwealth Charter is talking about democracy, human rights, and good governance. You cannot have any of those values without a strong civil society that underpins it. When we talk about, there are many democracies within our Commonwealth family that are very challenged and growing and emerging democracies, I would say. Some go 2 steps forward and a bit of a step back. But I think that being able to look at periodically, every 2 years, that there is an organisation that values the voice of civil society enough to host these very major events and then come together, and they're all together. We all feel a lot more confident when we are united with others, and they sit around a table and they debrief foreign ministers firsthand on what they believe was important. It is very hard as a leader to denounce the ideas that come forward. So I actually think it's a very clever way of the Commonwealth engaging. Much of what the Commonwealth does in this space is softly. And I can't speak more highly of the Commonwealth principles of freedom of expression and the role of media in good governance. So that is one of the very important key documents that was agreed at CHOGM. And some of the structures that are not always, it's a very complex structure, the Commonwealth, but one of the elements which I would call the political arm, or CMAG, Commonwealth Ministerial Action
Yes.
Group. And that is where things don't go right, members can be referred to this political arm or CMAG. And then the political arm can make recommendations. That could be from suspension right through to other areas where we believe predominantly around suspension or being taken out of the Commonwealth. And so having some of these things and charters that we all agree to that really speak to civil society and open expression on the ground, I think are incredibly valuable.
If I can just make one comment again. Before all of this, when we were getting the agenda, tightened, my own office, we had a number of Australians, some of them former ministers who are now very active with NGOs, actually approached us wanting to push certain issues to be taken to the table at the forum. And so I said, look, process it through us and we'll just pass it on, because our Ministry of Foreign Affairs had to go back to the Commonwealth Secretariat, and as well as the membership in terms of some of these issues. So there was a lot of issues coming out. And the fact that we could actually bring it down to 37 compared to the requests that came in was just unbelievable. And for me personally, I just thought, I didn't realize that we could actually stir up so much interest, that there was things coming in from the left, right, and center that did matter. And it was just trying to assimilate what could go where and make an impact in terms of the discussions that actually eventuated on a lot of these issues, which could be housed under one or the other. But it was a lot of work just trying to bring in all of these things that were coming out from within Australia through to our office, to the government. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, sure.
I'm happy to sort of step in the conversation. But this is the end of a long process. 1949, the establishment of the Commonwealth, where government set up an intergovernmental organisation, Secretariat, and alongside at the very same time, the Commonwealth Foundation, which was an NGO, but mainly focused on professionals. But the fact is that over those years, when there was very little, they emerged on separate tracks and did things separately, although there was collaboration. But embedded in the Commonwealth Secretariat were all of these intergovernmental initiatives on a whole range of things: education, agriculture, industry, environment, lawyers, you name it, all of those sorts of things. There were divisions in the Commonwealth Secretariat, and they were fostering what was happening in the development of these developing countries. Today, there was something like 96, 98 NGOs formally established in all these areas: law, environment, agriculture, architects, and they are formally associated with the Commonwealth Secretariat. So it's a different situation, and totally open to a magnificent development of independent civil society organisations. That's one of the reforms that's got to be looked at, and how that's all handled. But it does constitute a unique feature of the Commonwealth, which doesn't actually exist, to my knowledge, in any other international.
Well, thanks for that comment, Hugh. In fact, it really goes to one of the questions I was going to raise on behalf of one of our online participants, who was asking what are the measures that CHOGM's taking to ensure successful collaboration among member states with diverse priorities and capacities. But I think between us, we've answered that point quite well now. So we've still got time for another question, if there is one from the floor. Rosemary.
Well, I'm Rosemary Ganley and I'm a member of the local chapter, but I have a long and ongoing history with defence. So my question is, what did you all say about China and the influence of China on the Commonwealth countries?
Well, that's broad enough for us all to have a wrap-up conversation about.
Should let Kate go first.
It really was not an issue that came up in the forums, to be honest. I mean, I was not at the leaders' retreat. The leaders' retreat literally is only for leaders, but it was not a feature of the executive sessions, and it was not a feature of negotiations or the, you know, the leaders' declaration.
That seems extraordinary.
Well, can I comment on that? I don't think it's extraordinary. I think sometimes in Australia, in the foreign policy debate space, and we've just had the Australian Institute of International Affairs National Conference, where China very much featured. China is not seen in the same way everywhere, even in the Pacific. And the fact that in somewhere like the Commonwealth is climate is much more of an issue in China. And then it wasn't particularly relevant to the sort of, it's not a member. There's a sort of approach that's taken. We don't talk about non-members. We don't talk about the United States. So, you know, we're a family. We talk about the issues of the family in the Commonwealth. We don't generally get into great strategies, although I, in the past, have been in meetings where the test ban was a big issue, the UK rather opposed to what eventually they signed on to in the test ban treaty. And that was, I remember that one particularly in Auckland because we had to negotiate language which was acceptable to the British around that, which was basically all Commonwealth members believe in this, stopping testing, with the exception of one, and they changed their mind a year or so later. So it's not the sort of environment where you would have that discussion generally, but also, you know, China didn't try to intrude on this either. I think they handled it well. We all have our relations there. And I think, you know, it's actually quite useful to go over to a CHOGM and think it's not always all about China. It's not always all about the United States. Yes, these things are important, but there are other things that are important as well and greater priorities, particularly in some small island developing states.
The one thing I would say is I think that the fact that BRICS did coincide with the CHOGM meeting says that they think that Commonwealth is important. And we're quite pleased to try and divert some of the participants. The Commonwealth is important, but yes, there was a diversity of issues. I would direct you to paragraph 15 of the leaders' communique, deals with sort of peace and security and the ongoing armed conflicts around the globe. So, but it's a very high level statement. So.
No,
Only if you wish.
no, I really have nothing to add. I mean, we'd worked through a very extensive agenda, and for us, it wasn't really an issue. As you know, both Professor Matthew and Kate have said, I guess it's because we all have our own different sub-regional approach to this. And as I said, that's the reason why for us as a region under the Pacific Islands Forum, that's where our voices are very collective with Australia and New Zealand on the China issue.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we might leave it there, I think, and on everyone's behalf, please let me thank our speakers today for bringing out the value and the importance of the Commonwealth and its enduring role in international affairs. And on behalf of the AIIA, I'd like to just pass over a couple of mementos to each of our speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gary.